is not, do we have values or don't we have values? We all have values. I think the question is, are our values in service of life and the greater good?
Business life. So imagine me telling my wife and my kids, okay, my values for you are decision-making, achievement, efficiency, what it's, for them, it's compassion, kindness, respect, education, experiences, and so forth. So that's why I love just having like different set of values, but at least
understanding what we do, what our egos do to protect ourselves is really a useful practice as a conscious leader. So we know if we look at our egos, what do? We tend to do.
Hello, I'm César, and I'm the founder and managing director of Dharma Center for Wellbeing, and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Re-Engaged at Work, a podcast designed with you in mind to help you improve engagement, retention, and performance, obviously through workplace well-being. Now, before we start today's episode, please make sure to click the subscribe button below so you can be the first to benefit from the wisdom, experience, and thought leadership of our distinguished guests. And speaking of distinguished guests, on today's episode, we have the one and only Gina Hayden. Now, Gina, can you say hi before I properly introduce you?
Hi, César. Really, really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Gina, I've known Gina for quite a while. She is the director of Sphere Consulting Services, and Gina has been providing executive coaching and leadership coaching and team coaching as well, team development and leadership programs to a wide range of companies around the world, from household names to multinational companies to innovative startups. And I've witnessed the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful work that she's been doing over the past, 3 decades. I mean, I've known you, Gina, for about perhaps 15 years. 10, 15 years. It's been quite a while. And I remember very clearly, I think it was toward the end of 2016 that you actually became a published author. So was it December 2016 or January 2017 that you published your book?
December 2016, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. And the book is actually called Becoming a Conscious Leader. And it's a really good book that will show you how to achieve self-mastery, how to ensure your teams are bringing their whole selves to work, how to create a positive impact in the world, and of course, how to find purpose beyond profit, right? So on this episode, obviously, we wanted to talk about why is it that we need to become a conscious leader if we want to improve engagement, retention, and performance, given the state of the world. And of course, Gina will provide you with a very practical roadmap and very practical steps on how to actually become a conscious leader. So again, Gina, we are so happy, so delighted, and so honored to have you on our episode today.
Looking forward to a great conversation with you today. Thank you, César.
Fantastic, Gina. Now, so Gina, before I share with you let me share with you the state of the world today, the way I see it. And this is a factual observation, right? So 10% of the world actually lives in extreme poverty. About 50% of the world, live on $5 a day. 1 out of 4 people do not have access to safe drinking water. 50% of people around the world do not have access to basic sanitation. There are 110 live conflicts right now in the world, 45 conflicts in the Middle East, 35 in Africa, 21 in Asia, 6 in Latin America. The world is in a sorry state. And if we talk about the business world, as you know from the Gallup surveys, more than 80% of workers around the world are disengaged, meaning that they only provide or give minimum effort to their jobs. For them, their job is just a job, and they're not willing to give an extra ounce of their energy, an extra ounce of their time, an extra ounce of anything they've got to their employers, because for them, it's just a job. And that's how 80% plus of workers feel around the world. 1 out of 3 workers have experienced, bullying in the workplace. 3 out of 4 workers around the world have witnessed, bullying in the workplace. And work-related stress, work-related anxiety, work-related depression is on the rise. Okay, we're suffering a pandemic of work-related stress, anxiety, and depression. So, as you can see, my dear Gina, I think we need a lot of conscious leadership in this world, don't you think?
Yes, when I listen to you, I feel my heart like, oh, it is. I heard it referred to the other day as a perma crisis, like a permafrost. It feels like there's a perma crisis. And I think the big question for us as we are in the world looking and relating at these events is, how do we want to relate to them? Do we want to get into reaction about them? Do we want to tighten up, fight back, get afraid, and yes, get sort of unable to think about what to do? Or do we want to find a different way in ourselves of responding? Something that is more open, where we can be part of the solution rather than adding to these perma crises problems. And this is really, I think, conscious leadership, and I'm becoming more and more convinced of this, is it is of its age now more than ever before. And I'm sure we'll go into this, but it's of its age at this time more than ever before. We need people who can lead like this in companies and create the kind of environments where, at least within the sphere that we have influence over, which could be a lot, we are not replicating the problems that we see in the world outside, but we're actually creating a different kind of hub around us where things can be different, the way we would really like them to be.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. We have the option to become active agents of change, right? And I want to become one, and the people that I'm coming across want to become one, but we need some kind of a roadmap. Where do we start? So, Gina, you've known me for a while, and you know that I love, I'm a definition nut. I really like to really clearly understand what certain terms mean so that we can explore them further, right? So the first question that I've got for you is, how would you actually define a conscious leader?
Okay. So I'm going to give you the nutshell, and then I'll build it out, right? So the nutshell, the kind of strappy strap line for me is that conscious leadership starts with the self, but it doesn't end with the self. And within that, we can unpack, what does that mean? So if we look at those two words, conscious and leadership, conscious means that we are aware of ourselves, and we're aware of a few things within ourselves. We're aware of what drives us. We're aware of our values, these motivations, maybe our sense of purpose as well. But we're also aware, if we go even further inside, here I am as a leader going even further inside, I'm aware of my conditioning. I'm aware of my thinking. I'm aware of how my habits of thinking, a bit like a groove in a record, the kind of LP records, how those grooves just play over and over again, and how that shapes and determines the way that I see reality and even create reality. So it comes from within me. So there is something about the self-mastery aspect, which is absolutely critical. Do I understand? Do I get what drives me? Do I get my ego? And can I release myself from my ego, from the conditioned thinking that just keeps me reacting to situations? But it doesn't stop there, because here I stand as a leader with the self-awareness. What do I want to do with this awareness? And if we look at conscious leadership, it's taking this awareness out into the world. So being authentic, acting ethically, it's an expression of ourselves for the greater good. And where is that? That is in my teams, that is in my organizations, that is in the stakeholders that are connected to my business. That is ultimately for the systems around us and for the planet. And there are two big influences at the moment in the world and in business. The one is AI, of course, and the fourth industrial revolution. And the second is this absolutely growing narrative of sustainability, which is unignorable now in companies. And if we look at what does it mean to actually lead in this environment where AI and sustainability are the two prongs to our experience these days, we have to look at, how do we create the environments as leaders where collective intelligence can come to bear in our teams, where it's not about me being the sole source of power and information because my ego is driving me, right? But actually, how do I create these these containers in my organization, my teams, for everybody to bring their genius and their collective intelligence. If you look at AI, it is like the democratization of information and therefore power. As a leader, I don't have the power anymore that I used to have because people around me are with information as fast as I am. And then if we look at the sustainability driver, my organization needs to show up, and it needs to account for itself because people are watching. If I'm a public company, people are watching. So actually, how am I then leading with the greater systems in mind? And how am I leading so that I'm not just making a profit, but actually we're also looking at our impact on the world around us? And these two forces are only going to grow. So a leader within this is able to have this self-awareness of where I tighten and I frighten, and actually loosen that, bring people together with our collective humanity and intelligence, and take action in the world for the greater good.
Yeah. And Gina, I'm going to go back to the self-awareness piece, which is, I think it's very, very important. So if you had to define, what a conscious leader is in one sentence, what would that definition be for you from your perspective?
For me, it would be a leader who is aware of themselves and what drives them, and is able to have self-management over that and not get caught up in their thinking, so that they can show up in the world in a way that is helpful and beneficial to more people, more systems on the planet.
No wonder you're one of the most renowned thought leaders in this space, Gina. Now, let's go back to the self-awareness piece, right? And let's talk about something very, very important that not many of us actually spend much time reflecting on, which is our value system. Even wisdom traditions, basically say to us that if we want to live a life of meaning, and if we want to live a life of purpose, we have to live a values-led life, right? But we need to understand what those values are. And I'm the kind of person that really dislikes being cornered, into a space in which you gotta choose your 5 values that drive you, right? But I've got values that apply to my family life. I've got values that apply to my, business life, and then there might be values that overlap between the two, right? So I like to actually have a broad set of values that actually have, their place in, in specific aspects of my life, right? So how would you encourage people to really begin the process of exploring what their values? How can I, as a person, understand what my values are?
I love this topic to start with because I think you've started at exactly the right place for somebody looking to develop as a conscious leader. When I'm working with companies and coaching executives, we will often start with this question. And I think you point to something that's really important, which is none of us wants to be constrained by our past, right? So no one wants to be put in a box and say, this is all you are. So I think in terms of values, let's look at it as an exploration of what is most important to me. What do I prioritize as a leader over other things? So if I prioritize efficiency, decision-making, and achievement, top 3, that's going to drive a particular way that I show up at work and for my people. And being aware of that effect is useful because I might be leading some people who are interested in sustainability, kindness, and collaboration, right? So how do I show up in such a way? Am I interested in other people's values? But other parts of values, I think values is an interesting philosophical conversation because values in and of themselves are not enough. If you take Israel and Palestine, I mean, let's really go big, right? They have their own set of values, right? You take a group of terrorists, for example, they're going to have a set of values and they're going to be purpose-driven, right? The question is not, do we have values or don't we have values? We all have values. I think the question is, are our values in service of life and the greater good? Are we coming at it from let's find solutions that are best for all of us? Or are we coming at it from a more egocentric set of values, which is I'm making myself and my group right, and you and your group wrong. And this happens in business, which is we're going to kill the competition and beat them down to a pulp. Or it could be at a world stage, which is literally, I'm going to kill you because I believe your belief systems are different to mine. So it's not about the values, about what we do with the values. And I think the other thing that's important about values is values are a construct. We're not born with values. We develop them through our life experience and through our conditioning. So there is an opportunity for us as human beings to grow and evolve. To your point about not being boxed in. So if we look at ourselves and we look at how we show up in terms of our values, we can also ask ourselves very practically, how do my values overlap with the values of the organization? And which values am I able to live my most authentic expression of myself in this organization? How am I shaping environments where my teams can connect what is most important to them to the work of my organization? Because to the point of your podcast, this is where engagement comes in. This is if I can help my people understand what is important to them and link it to the work that we're doing, and if we can link the work that we're doing to the impact in the world outside, if that is a positive chain, then I'm going to get people going, I can see meaning in my work, right? And we can grow and evolve together to start looking at, well, what other qualities do I want to bring online? I don't just have to be the person I was yesterday. I can actually evolve myself into someone I want to be, me and my teams.
This is really interesting, and we're going to go back to linking values with purpose and meaning. But before we go there, I just wanted to kind of go back to the values, the examples that you gave on values when you talked about efficiency, decision making, and achievement. So this is a perfect example of, in my particular case, having kind of a different set of values for my family life and in my business life. So imagine me telling my wife and my kids, okay, my values for you are decision making, achievement, efficiency. You know what? It's for them it's compassion, kindness, respect, education, experiences, and so forth. So that's why I love just having like different set of values, but at least being very clear on what those values are, right? And then we've got a set of family values as well, which I would, this would work perfectly in the business context, because if we spend time with our teams, understanding what are our team's values, right? So basically, what's driving us to actually do this, and that's connected to the purpose element as well. What's the, why is this work meaningful to you? And for people to understand why is this work meaningful to them, they need to understand the impact that it has on the clients that they're serving or society. And let me give you a personal example of mine. I used to work for a major IT company in the past, and I was given the job of researching the needs of uh, companies in the hospitality industry, and particularly their communication needs using technology. And of course, the first 3 or 4 months of this job, I was having the time of my life because I was going to cruise ships and hotels and restaurants, and I was really analyzing how they were working. And it got to the point in which, even though I was traveling the world and doing this, research work, it got a little kind of old. Just meeting with IT managers and users, and then my boss was really really astute, and he basically observed that I was kind of losing a bit of my initial energy and then my initial impetus with all of this, and he summoned me and he said, hey, I've noticed that you're still doing what you're supposed to do, but I don't see the same level of energy that you started with. And I just want you to understand something. What you're doing, the research work that you're doing will help other people be their best in moments that matter. And I said, Jeff, can you actually say that to me again? Yes, the work that you're doing, okay, the research that you're doing, you're going to help people improve the way they communicate in the hospitality industry, and you are going to help them be their best in moments that matter. And I still get goosebumps. And he told me this like 20 years ago, right? And it totally, totally shifted the way I approach my work. I was doing I did exactly the same thing for 3 or 4 months, after that, but my whole, perspective changed because he was able to link, my work, and he gave it meaning and he gave it purpose. right? So, to all of our listeners, make sure that you really are very clear on what your team values are. Make sure that everyone in the team knows, how they're contributing to the departments that they might be serving internally in the business, or to the clients, or to society in general. It doesn't really matter if you are doing spreadsheets all day long, right? There's always some kind of meaning that you can actually find. Now, going back to the meaning and purpose, right? A lot of people, Gina, get the idea that you have just one purpose in life. Like, my purpose in life is to sail across the Atlantic, or my purpose in life is to, write a book. Yeah, but after you sail the Atlantic and after you write a book, what are you going to do next? Right? So we should allow ourselves to actually have multiple purposes in life. And as we grow and we evolve, those purposes might tweak and change. So the question that I've got for you is, um, what's the best way of really understanding our purpose, or our multiple purposes in life? What's the best approach to that, Gina?
The approach that I really love is by a chap called Richard Leader, Lieder. And he has done a lot of work in his whole life. I think his purpose is to look at purpose. And he talks about purpose, I think, in a very helpful way, rather than being this thing that feels heavy that we better find, otherwise we have a meaningless life, which I think is an ultimately unhelpful approach to purpose. He talks about it as three things. He talks about it as a sense of direction, which implies that we grow and evolve as we're enacting it. He then talks about it as a means of contribution, so a way that we can actually give through our sense of purpose. And then he talks about it as a way that we can evolve and learn. So these three things: a sense of direction, a means of contribution, and a path to growth and giving. These three things form like a bundle of qualities of purpose, which makes it a very dynamic thing. And I think, as a conscious leader, then what we are as a conscious leader, then what we're looking for is not to nail down a sense of purpose and make it forever so, but actually to look for ourselves at what are we passionate about right now? How does this link to our business? And how can it link to our organization? And then what is the role of our organization in the world? I think the most exciting thing for me about purpose is if we can link our values to my sense of what my values, to what I want to do in the world that energizes me, link that into my company, and link the impact of my company into the role it can play in the world. If there's a through line between those things, then you get a real sense of energy coming through, motivation and inspiration. And then as a conscious leader, if I do that for other people, then I really start to see that beautiful example you gave of the lights coming on for people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we have to go beyond just having a very clear mission statement and vision statement, and and values posted on the wall. This is a conversation that needs to be ongoing, right? This is a every day, making sure that your team members are aware, of what they're doing. I usually, in my business, I as soon as I receive an email from a client saying that they're happy with A, B, C services, I share it with the team right away, because they need to actually see the impact that they're having, right? So it's not just a matter of having these conversations in a town hall. It's having these conversations about aligning values and purpose, all day long, which I absolutely love, Gina. And one thing that I would recommend to our listeners as well is, I love Rumi's quote, a Persian poet from the 1500s, when he said, "What you're seeking is seeking you." So if you want to get more clarity around your values and about your purpose, just go within. Embrace practices like meditation, and embrace practices like contemplation, self-inquiry, and through the silence, and through those kinds of exercises, I think that information will start coming up to the surface, right? And I'm a big promoter of meditation, Gina, and even if you just practice 5 or 10 minutes a day, whatever technique you want to use, that silence that you will create in your mind will allow for, that information to actually surface to, up to the mind. What's your view on these practices in order to get clarity on values and purpose, Gina?
Yeah, I'm so glad you went there, Cesar. So I think this is the beginning of the beginning. Values are an easy entry into it, but ultimately, what we're looking at to be self-aware human beings with self-management and self-mastery is, can we quieten our minds and not get taken away on the trains of thought? And back to your very first question, the world that we're in, the perma-crisis world we're in, and the social media world we're in, there are a billion reasons every day why we can just get dragged away by our thinking. But we are not, I think it was Einstein who had this saying around, make a substantial change from the level of thinking that creates the problem. So how do we create some space for fresh thinking to come through? And it begins with quietening the mind. It begins with not identifying with our thinking. And so how do we settle the mind? We settle the mind by settling down into our bellies and away from the busyness and the chattering of the mind. So we are right into mindfulness. And of course, mindfulness revolution is massive. But I think, I find leaders have an interesting relationship with mindfulness. Some of them, it's a bit like, oh, it's an extra thing I have to do in the day. I haven't got time for this. It's a bit woo-woo. It's like what the people do when they go to yoga retreats. People have like, this is not part of my everyday life. So I think I would want to say to your listeners, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very simple. It's simply in a moment, you can have your eyes open. You can literally just for a moment drop your awareness down into your lower belly and just take one breath. And there is some silence there and some space in that. And it's just giving your system a break from the zinging mind that's constantly revving to try to deal with all of the demands and all of the challenges of our lives and our businesses every day. So you can take these moments, it can be one breath away, that you can just take these moments to drop down, create some space. And you mentioned silence. Silence is like the foundation of everything. But in that silence, there is spaciousness. And in the space, fresh insight can come through. Intuition can have a chance to emerge. Maybe some new intelligence has a chance to have a bit of a gap to shine through. Whereas the busy mind doesn't really allow for any of that to happen because it's taking the same operating system and just like running it over the same situations to try to solve them. And I think that the idea of meditation or the idea of quietness is a bit like upgrading the operating system of our minds. If you have this analogy I love, if you have your laptop open and you have all your windows open and you're running everything at the same time, and you've got Zoom and Teams and your email and the internet and chat GPTs going on all at the same time, your system is going to slow down. So the idea of quietening down is just to close some of those windows so that you have a bit more power in your operating system. And with that, you can perhaps see things a bit more clearly. You can show up in a less stressed, overwrought way with your teams. And I love this example on the cruise ship. Your boss knew there was something going on with you, and he knew what to say in a way. He was aware enough to know what motivated you. He said something to you that changed your relationship to your circumstances and got 3 more years of motivated person out of you. We can't do that if we're totally in our heads the whole time, busy solving things.
Yeah, and it's funny how you mentioned how some executives say they don't have time to meditate. I usually suggest for people that haven't engaged in meditation in the past to at least practice, 5-10 minutes a day. And if they tell me that they haven't got time, then my suggestion is for them to do it twice a day, you know, because I guess, not I guess, no, I know that a quiet mind, will help you to really understand what's important to you, and it will help you to prioritize, and it will help you to really focus on what's important to you. And all of that extra additional stuff, you won't care about it anymore. But anyway, Gina, we can be very clear about our values. We can be very clear about our purpose. Our team can be very clear about values and purpose. And we can just run with it, but we can torch the village in the process, right? Because we're so determined and we're so effective and we're so efficient and we want to make a difference. So that's why I want you to talk to us. What's the role of empathy and compassion in conscious leadership? But first, I would like to propose a definition of empathy and compassion, just to kind of clarify things, because I usually ask people, what's the difference between empathy and compassion, and people are not very clear on that. So at least the way that I've understood empathy for a while is that there are three levels of empathy, right? You've got cognitive empathy, which is, Gina, I understand where you're coming from. I see your perspective, but there's not an emotional investment in that understanding. So if you're feeling disillusion, disappointment, disheartened about something, I'm not feeling those emotions. I just understand where you're coming from. And that's cognitive empathy. And then you move on to emotional empathy, which is, I understand your perspective, I understand where you're coming from, and I feel your disillusionment, I feel your disappointment, I feel how disheartened you are, and I feel those feelings as if they are mine. No, that would be emotional empathy. And then you've got compassionate empathy, which is basically compassion in itself. And to me, that's very, very clear. Compassion is exactly the same as emotional empathy. I understand where you're coming from. I see your perspective. I feel what you're feeling. But this time, I'm motivated and even inspired to help out. I want to assuage the pain. I want to assuage the suffering. So if you want to see it in a formula format, compassion is emotional empathy plus action. So action is what makes it compassion. And let me give you a very clear example of that. And I get goosebumps just by remembering this example. Soon after the conflict in the Ukraine started, I was living in Hampshire at the time, and a bunch of Sikhs decided to get together, and I think they managed to get like 10 or 12 lorries. They loaded up those lorries with, blankets and medicines and food supplies and, a bunch of stuff. And they drove all the way from Hampshire, England to Poland, to deliver those goods. So this is compassion in action. So they felt what they were feeling and they were driven to do something about it, right? So, and I still get goosebumps just from remembering that,
I know. It
And that's
touches
why,
the heart.
exactly, and that's why the Buddhists are so keen in people feeling compassion, because compassion requires material action, right? So, what do you think the role of empathy or even compassion is in the realm of conscious leadership, Gina?
Oh, what a beautiful question. Thank you for that gorgeous example. I remember during the pandemic, actually, in the UK, there were groups of Sikhs getting together, and they were just feeding people who were struggling, because that's what they do. That's the belief, and it was beautiful. Yeah, it's an action. Um, so the role of this in conscious leadership, I think the thing that's important here is we are whole human beings showing up every day in our lives. And we're showing up in our workplaces as whole human beings, meaning we are not just a head or a brain. Our bodies are not just here to carry our brains around from meeting to meeting, because that's often what it feels like. I work with people and they're so busy. How are you doing today, John? Really busy. Like, okay, everybody's very busy, but there's like, where is the rest of you? Are you even present in the moment? So I like to think, when I'm thinking about leadership, as a whole person leadership, so that yes, there is the mind, and it is stilling the mind, but there's also the heart, which is where the compassion and empathy comes in. We all have one. It's all important to us. Like, we are human beings at work. And then there's also the kind of ground of being. There's the kind of silence and the stillness where we can make wiser choices. So the sort of head, heart, and gut. And I think that in terms of what you're saying and conscious leadership, it is bringing all these three centers online. It's not just running around with our mind from moment to moment, fixing things and doing things, but stopping, being present, bringing the heart in. You gave a great framework there for dropping down. I think understanding where where people are coming from, tuning into my feelings and my needs underneath my busy action every day, and tuning into my team's feelings and their needs. I've got a leader at the moment who I would say I'm coaching him. He's probably sort of at the beginning stages of thinking about leadership. I asked him a question the other day about what does he think is motivating and driving his teams, and what do they need from you? And silence. It had never occurred to him to think about what do they need from me. He was only thinking about how do I get the task achieved and delegating their work, right? So these things around feelings and needs really, really important because we are whole people showing up at work. And if you want to get, for your listeners, if you want to get discretionary effort out of people, you have to bring their hearts and their values and their needs and what is important to them online. And you have to link that to the purpose of the company. Otherwise, you simply get somebody turning up to work, getting through the day, great resignation, disengaged, waiting for the pub in the evening or waiting for the holidays and retirement. And how much more if you've got people who are lit up in your teams, lit up in your organization, feeling that what the organization is doing is really important in the world. And what's interesting as we now get, back, you can hear, I think, a lot about systems. If we look at the big trends in the world and we look at what the generation coming through is expecting from their organizations and their leaders, and you look at what the world outside the context is pressurizing us to do, to think about the impact of our businesses on the world. We cannot ignore climate, we cannot ignore plastics, we cannot ignore environment. So with these sort of two pressure points coming in from both sides, we have to think about creating workplaces where people feel that what they do matters. Because collectively, we're going to do more and create better results for all of us if we work together to achieve them.
Yeah. And I love what you said about making sure that we tune into, our team members' needs and tune into our team members' feelings as well, right? And I had a meeting like 3 or 4 weeks ago with a client, and this particular person actually was displaying some kind of weird behaviors. And I talked to a colleague of mine. I said, what's your read on this particular person? And she said to me, oh, she's a non-empath. And
And not
a non-empath, someone that is not equipped with empathy in their
horrible
system.
label.
No, it's like, really? I hadn't heard that term before. Anyway, so I don't believe that, there's people that are, I mean, I believe that there are, what do you call it, people that are sociopaths, but deep down, every single human being has the capacity for empathy. So for, our listeners, if you want to start developing your capacity for empathy, a couple of things that I would suggest for you to do is, number one, active listening. And Gina, you're very familiar with this because you've been coaching for 30 years, but it's just wonderful to actually see this in motion. So next time someone comes to you, and they basically share with you some kind of difficulty, a predicament, or, or whatever the situation might be, set the intention of just listen. Okay. Even if it's just for 5 10, don't say a single word. Okay. Just be, receptive. Obviously, your body language needs to inform the other person and communicate to the other person that you're actually paying attention, right? And it's interesting what happens even in 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, I do this exercise often with people at workshops, and it's just unreal, what you see in the room. People start just by listening, connecting to what the other person is saying, because as the other person is allowed the space to share and to reflect, and to basically connect with the emotions, that they're feeling, because of that particular situation, the person listening is actually able to connect with that as well. The problem that a lot of us actually have is that when someone comes to us, we immediately, want to solve the situation. We immediately want to offer our advice. We immediately say, oh yeah, that happened to me actually. And you know what? This is how I handled it. And that's not the best way to go. People need to understand that listening is a response in itself. Listening is a response in itself. So just, as a practical exercise, do this with your family members, with your, colleagues at work. Just set the intention of, I'm just going to listen, for 5 or 10 minutes. And if you want to interject just for clarity, make it just like a sentence. Or if you want to interject in some kind of way, just rephrase what the other person is saying, but limit your interventions to, getting clarification or rephrasing. And then you will start feeling inside of you, basically emotions that arise that are connected to what the other person is feeling as well. So that's a good way to start developing your empathy muscle. And by the way, if you do this, often enough, that will or may actually trigger compassion as well. And by the way, you don't have to drive a lorry to Poland, to practice compassion. You can practice compassion on a 5-minute conversation on a hallway at work. Someone comes to you, they share something difficult with you. In a few minutes, you listen, you connect, and then you offer at the end of that conversation, your desire to help. That's a compassionate exchange in 5 minutes, right? And something that I learned a while back is uh, people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care, and so it's just a matter of practice. And Gina, another topic that I wanted to bring to the
Well,
conversation as well is,
no, just before
oh yeah,
we go into the topic, can I add something for your listeners there? Because I think there are 2 or 3 questions that really help. The If you think about really being there for somebody else, there is the kind of tell me about the situation question, right? What's happening, and then the listening. But the 2 other questions you can really ask that tap into the other person really feeling listened to. The first one is to ask them, what is the impact of this on you? And this taps into their emotional life. They get to drop down and talk about from the heart how they feel about the situation. And then if you want to go even deeper, you can ask them, why is this important to you? And that taps down into their motivation, their sense of purpose, what's really going on for them underneath. If you think about an iceberg, it's like dropping down into what's under the water with those 2 questions. What is the impact on you, and why is this important to you? And the experience for the other person is of feeling deeply, deeply seen. Because when we're looking at being compassionate, what we're really doing, yes, it is about the action, but in the moment, in the corridor, what do we long for is to be seen. We want to see and be seen. It's the most beautiful human experience. And these kinds of questions can help somebody else really feel seen. When we feel seen, we feel motivated because we feel understood and heard.
yeah, and powerful, powerful, powerful coaching questions, actually. That's why I love coaching as well. It's anyway, and by the way, the thing you mentioned about being seen, there at the end of the day, what human beings want are the 4 A's: attention, affection, appreciation, and acceptance. Right, those 4 things, and we can give those 4 things on on a regular basis: attention, affection, appreciation, and acknowledgement and acceptance. Sorry, right, and if you cover those bases again with your team members, your family, your loved ones, you're home free, right? Gina, another concept that I want to bring into this conversation as well, which relates obviously to conscious leadership, is authenticity and vulnerability, right? And let's start with one of my favorites, actually, vulnerability. What do you think the role of vulnerability is in conscious leadership?
I think if we're walking around with our Teflon coating on in our organizations, we're unrelatable. And people pick it up because they feel afraid, they shut down, and there's no psychological safety. And we know for people to take risks, to bring their best selves, so that we can innovate, to be fit for purpose for the world, we need to draw on everybody's genius. So the vulnerability of a leader means that you are not showing up with your armor on, with your Teflon coating in place, but you're willing to share what is important to you. Maybe your values, that can really help. What you truly care about. maybe actually some of your concerns without making your people think that, oh God, the ship is out of control and who's steering, right? But actually being real. And it's an incredibly inspiring thing because when you're more human, meaning being more vulnerable, it allows people that you're leading to be more vulnerable and to be more human. When you've got humans together, then all kinds of amazing things can happen.
Um, there's a story I came across not so long ago about vulnerability that really moved me, which is there was this school that put up a show called the Anti-Talent Show. And this show required for teachers, all the teachers in the school, to pick a skill that they were not good at. So, for instance, poetry, reading, dancing, playing a musical instrument, juggling, whatever that might be. Okay, and they were given 2 weeks to learn this particular skill. And then after learning that skill, they had to go back and perform this newly learned skill in front of the entire school. Okay. So some teachers decided to take up, trumpet playing, violin, or dancing, or whatever, right? So after 2 weeks, they came back, they performed, and as you can imagine, every single teacher absolutely sucked in front of the entire school. All the children were actually, watching them really do a terrible job and embarrassing themselves in a way, right? And they asked one of the children, like, so what was your experience of this? And I think his response summarized, most of the feelings that were felt by the children, during the anti-talent show. And he said, um, watching my teachers struggle, made me feel that I had permission to struggle myself. And I'm choking up right now because it was, can you imagine, an 8-year-old kid saying something like that? Seeing my
Beautiful.
teachers struggle make me feel, gives me permission, to struggle myself. Wow. So I want you to, I want our listeners to extrapolate this, to how we run our teams and how we run our businesses. And failure. I remember, the concept of failure, right? Um, Paula, who's now 15, my daughter, when she was about 6 or 7, she came into my office one day with the word fail written on a piece of paper. And she said to me, Dad, do you know what this word means? And I said to myself, oh my gosh, where's this going, right? I said, no, Paula, what does it mean? Fail. Fail is actually not a word. It's an acronym. And what does this acronym mean? First attempt in learning. First attempt in learning. So I remember standing up and embracing Paula. I said, Paula, thank you so much for saving me 2 years worth of psychological therapy. Because if you understand this now, you know, it is okay for you to mess up. It is okay for you to make mistakes, and even more, it's even better if you admit them openly, and publicly, and then you're going to give permission for people to do the same. And that's the whole, the spirit of psychological safety in the end, having the liberty or feeling the liberty of taking, you know, um, calculated risks, for the sake of innovation or whatever, right? So,
And I think for your listeners, for all of us as human beings, understanding what we do, what our egos do to protect ourselves is really a useful practice as a conscious leader. So we know if we look at our egos, what do? We tend to do things like we want to be perfect, therefore not fail. We want to control the situation in order not to fail. We want to protect ourselves in order not to be hurt. We want to be liked, but then we can't be authentic because we have to be liked for everybody. So our ego has these kind of ways of showing up, which is our ways of protecting ourselves in order, we think, to survive. Being right, knowing most, looking better than others, defending ourselves. All of this doesn't allow for true human connection. And so I think a really good practice for people who are wanting to become more conscious as leaders is to notice those edges in ourselves where we find ourselves shutting off and protecting ourselves and asking, well, what's going on there? Like, why do we feel the need to protect ourselves there? Are we trying to look better than others? Are we like, I'm a recovering perfectionist. When I look back, man, I was like, everything had to be just so. Like, stop it already. It's okay to fail. So I love your story about it is all right to fail. Like, this is how we learn. And I think we can't have psychologically safe environments if we're all caught up in getting everything right all the time. It just doesn't allow for being real.
Yeah, yeah.
Never
I'm
mind.
just go yeah, I'm just going back to that memory in my mind right now, and it's quite endearing. Anyway, Gina, so let's be practical, right? And so for the benefit of our listeners, if you can come up with a list of bullet points as to what are the key things that we actually need to start doing in order to embark on this journey or of becoming a more conscious leader to improve again engagement, retention, and performance. What would that laundry list look like in bullet in bullet form?
Hmm. All right. This is where your and my style is different. So
I
let
know it is. I know.
down
I know
into
you're
this
suffering
process.
now.
So I would say, right, let me think about this. Start with self. Start with a few moments of mindfulness to quieten the mind. Number one, settle. Within that, practice awareness of yourself as you're in the moment around going around work. Where do I get in my own way and getting other people's way? Where am I protecting and stopping the flow from happening? So that's the me. I would become curious. I would think about what are the other points of view that are different from mine? And if people see, I would ask my teams, who sees it differently? And I would allow for that difference rather than having to make it my view of the world. And then I would think about how do I go out and meet my teams? I would become interested in what is important to them and what they value. I would think about what is our purpose as a team within this organization. I would look at how much am I bringing their voices online? And then beyond that, I would start thinking about what is going on in the world around me. We've only touched on the self aspect of conscious leadership in this conversation. I feel like we should have another 3 more conversations, César, because there is a whole, not just me and me, there is me in this organization. This is my organization in the world. So I would really start thinking about what is the role of my organization in the world? Is it just to make money? Because my people are not going to be inspired and motivated by getting up in the morning and going, great, I'm going to make money for the shareholders today. This is not what gets people out of bed. So what is the role of my company in the systems in which it operates? And do we have a sense of doing good? And what am I as a leader doing to help to instill in my company a sense that it's not just about us, it's about all of us. So what are the practices of my organization in the world? And then if I really wanted to take this out farther, as far as it can go, how can I, as a conscious leader, use my business as a platform, a powerful platform for doing good in the world? How does my personal vision get expressed to this organization and get expressed out into the world so that actually I can use the power of my company to actually create some good out there? That is the full range for me, from starting with the self, the me, to the we, out to the world. And from the way I see it, conscious leadership is, yes, it starts with the self and it's massive, but it is not just self-awareness. It doesn't stop with self. It's actually your point about action. And what do I do? And what do I do for the benefit of all beings, for the greater good? Because heavens, we need to be thinking in that way right now. We can't just be acting from what's good for me or my team or my organization.
So the self, the we, and the world. That sequence, right?
Me.
And yeah, exactly. Self, we, world. Is that an acronym? W SWW, self, we, world. And wisdom traditions actually say that, the one of the purpose of life is, or in order for us to live a fulfilled life experience, is to identify our purpose and then put it to the service of, humanity at the end of the day. It's the actually the number one activity that makes human beings happy, and this is undisputed and no one can question this. The number one activity, actually, when I ask people this, what's the number one activity that make people happy? Some people say sex and shopping, and in some countries, actually now shopping is higher in the list than sex. Can you believe that? But anyway, but the number one activity that makes human beings happy is making other people happy at the end of the day. And that's not debatable. That's not up for debate. It is what it's a fact of science. And anyway, Gina, so listen, I could stay hours and hours and hours and hours, exploring, the S, the W, and the W. I mean, there's so much to talk about this, and I'm going to invite you later on as well, for a follow-up conversation about this, because I find this topic absolutely amazing. And I just want to clarify to, our audience that becoming a conscious leader doesn't divorce yourself from the concept of, profit or making money or abundance or anything like that. They can actually go hand in hand. It's not like you're giving everything away and you're just giving your time to charitable work. There's not and please correct me if I'm wrong, Gina, if there's a separation between profit and being a conscious leader. Can you just, before we leave, can you just clarify that there's not a divorce between those two concepts?
Absolutely. I love to think of, if you think about the possibilities and power of business, right? It is more powerful than governments. It's faster than governments, right? We can't rely on regulations and sort of slow moving systems to actually meet the demands of the world that we have. So it is perfectly possible. And there are great examples of companies who are very profitable and at the same time are thinking about how they do business and the impact on the world around them. So they're doing good whilst also being profitable. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I think that's one of the probably the most exciting mental shifts that we have had in recent years, is that those two things are not mutually exclusive. We can do both. So conscious leaders get to play with, how do I do good business and do good in the world at the same time? I mean, that's going to take us another 100 years of play still. We have a great time ahead of us playing with that. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that, Gina. And Gina, I would like to end the podcast with a couple of questions, about you and about what you think about these things. And
Is
I
it like
haven't
a
told you.
quiz?
No, it's not a quiz. It's just a couple of questions for people to get to know you a little better, right? So, have you got any heroes that you look up to?
I wish you told me this before so I could have thought about this. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm going to go for the usual ones, like, well, my usual ones: Buddha, Gandhi, people who are able to be calm in the world and lead for change. Anyone who goes underneath that kind of banner. Yeah.
Yeah, they're on my list as well. And one final question, please complete the sentence. The world would be a better place if...
We all realized that we are not the sum total of our thinking, and that we have choices to respond and not just react.
Beautifully said, Gina Hayden. So, Gina, thank you so much, for taking the time to be part of our podcast. Like I said, I am going to extend a second invitation to keep talking about this really important, subject. And of course, to all our listeners, if you want to explore a particular topic or a particular aspect of what Gina and I talked about, please make sure to leave comments, under this video, so that we can pick up on those patterns of feedback, and then have Gina back on one of our next episodes to discuss what's important to you. So Gina, thank you so much and have a wonderful, conscious rest of your day.
Thank you for